The cell was cold, built from black alien stone that seemed to swallow light itself. In the corner sat a young alien woman, her wrists bound by glowing cuffs. Her white gown, once beautiful for her wedding, was now torn and dirty. Her silver eyes were filled with tears that wouldn't stop. She had been called a bride, but not by choice. Her name was Lyra, and tonight she was nothing more than a prize of war. Outside her cell she could hear laughter, rough, cruel voices of the soldiers who had captured her people. They spoke in a language of victory, celebrating their spoils. Every sound of their mocking voices made her sink deeper into despair. The fortress above her was filled with light, music, and power, but here in the dark there was only pain and silence. She had once believed her world was strong, that her people could never fall. But when the human fleet arrived months ago, she had heard stories. Some said humans were monsters, others said they were saviors. Now she didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that her people had lost. The warlord Korthar had claimed her as a symbol of victory. A bride for the conqueror, he said. Lyra had begged the stars for death rather than this humiliation. Yet death didn't come, only darkness and loneliness. Then one evening she heard something different, metal footsteps echoing down the corridor. The laughter of guards faded. Curious, she lifted her head. The cell door creaked open and 2 guards dragged someone inside. A human. He was tall, his face bruised, his uniform torn, but his eyes were alive with fire. They threw him into the cell beside hers and slammed the door shut. Another one who refused to kneel, one guard sneered. He'll learn soon enough. The door locked with a hiss and they left. For a while there was silence. Lyra stared at the human lying on the ground. His hands were tied and blood dripped from his lip. Still he didn't groan. He just breathed slowly, looking up at the dim red lights. Finally his gaze turned toward her. "You're not one of them," he said quietly. His voice was rough but calm. She looked away. "No, I am their trophy," he frowned. "You don't sound proud of that." Lyra gave a broken laugh. "Why would I be proud? My people are gone. My home is ashes. And tomorrow I'll be forced to marry a monster." The human sat up slowly, even though pain clearly burned through his body. "You think it's over," he said. "It's not." Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand. Korthar never lets anyone live after capture. Hope is foolish." He smiled faintly. "Hope is what keeps fools like me alive." There was something strange about this human. Even bound and beaten, he didn't look defeated. His calmness disturbed her. For years she'd been told humans were selfish and cruel, but this one, he spoke with kindness even to a stranger. "What's your name?" she asked, almost whispering. "Reed," he said. "Captain Reed." She hesitated. "Why are you here?" "I refused to give them my ship codes," he answered. "They thought I'd beg for mercy." "And did you?" "No," he said simply. Something inside Lyra trembled. His courage felt unreal. She wanted to believe in him even though she knew it was hopeless. As hours passed, the guards' voices faded again. The fortress above went quiet. In the silence, Reed shifted closer to her side of the wall. "Those cuffs," he whispered. "Do they lock with plasma bolts or magnetic fields?" Lyra blinked. "Magnetic, why?" Reed gave a small grin. "Then maybe I can help," she frowned. "You can't even move." "I have a habit of doing impossible things," he said. Slowly, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small metal pin. It was bent, blackened, but clearly hidden there for a reason. Lyra's heart started to race. "You had planned to escape?" "I don't plan," he said softly. "I act." For the first time in days, Lyra felt something she thought she'd lost, hope. Watching him work quietly in the shadows, she realized something powerful. This man didn't see her as a prize or a symbol. He saw her as a person worth saving. Hours later, when he finally looked up, he whispered, "When the lights go down, stay close to me." "We're getting out of here." Lyra stared at him, breath shaking. "You can't be serious," he gave her a tired smile. "I'm always serious when it matters." Outside, thunder rolled across the alien sky. Inside that cold cell, 2 strangers sat side by side, one broken, one unyielding. And for the first time since the war began, the darkness didn't feel endless anymore, because somewhere deep inside she knew this human might actually change everything. The next morning began with screams and metallic roars echoing through the halls. The warlord's fortress was never quiet for long. Prisoners were dragged out, some for labor, others for punishment. Lyra sat motionless, her wrists still raw from the night before. Reed, however, was already awake, calm, focused, his eyes tracing the guards' routines, every movement, every sound. He looked nothing like a soldier now, his uniform torn, his hands chained. But there was something about him that unsettled the guards. He didn't beg. He didn't speak. He simply watched, waiting. When the heavy doors opened, 2 armored guards entered. One barked, "Human, the warlord demands your presence." Reed didn't move. The guards grabbed him roughly and dragged him down the corridor. Lyra's heart raced. She wanted to shout for him not to go, but she knew it was useless. The moment the door slammed shut behind him, she felt a cold fear she couldn't explain. In the grand hall, Warlord Korthar sat on a massive throne made from the bones of fallen enemies. His glowing eyes burned like red suns and his armor shimmered with power. Around him stood dozens of alien officers, whispering and sneering. The guards threw Reed onto the floor. Korthar's deep voice thundered, "Human, you stand in my domain. Kneel before your better." Reed lifted his head slowly. His lip was still bleeding, but his eyes met the warlord's without fear. "I don't kneel," he said quietly. The hall went silent. Then laughter broke out, harsh, echoing, cruel. One of the generals slammed his fist on the table, amused. "He thinks he's brave." Korthar stood up, towering over Reed. "Your kind lost this sector. You have no right to speak." "Maybe," Reed said, his tone steady. "But humans don't measure worth by power. We measure it by heart." The warlord's expression darkened. "Heart? How amusing. I could crush yours with one hand." Reed smiled faintly. "Then do it. At least I die standing." The laughter died. The aliens exchanged looks. No one had ever spoken like this to Korthar and lived. Lyra, listening from her cell through the vents, felt her own breath stop. This man, this human, was either mad or magnificent. Korthar's clawed hand reached out, lifting Reed by his collar. "You're not brave," he hissed. "You're a fool," Reed stared right back. "Maybe, but fools like me change the world." For a long second, the two locked eyes. Then Korthar dropped him to the floor and laughed coldly. "Put him in the lower pit. Let him rot beside my bride. Perhaps she'll learn obedience from his screams." But when the guards dragged him away, Reed wasn't screaming. He looked almost. Calm back in the cell, Lyra jumped to her feet as the door opened again. Reed was thrown inside, bruised and bleeding. She knelt beside him instantly. "You shouldn't have said those things," she whispered. "He could have killed you." Reed chuckled weakly. "He still might. Then why provoke him?" "Because," Reed said, looking at her with tired eyes, "if you bow to a monster once, you'll bow forever. Someone has to remind them humans don't break that easily." Lyra didn't know what to say. No one in her world had ever defied Korthar, not even her own generals. Yet this broken man from another species entirely had done it without hesitation. "Reed," she said softly, "why risk your life for pride?" "It's not pride," he replied. "It's choice. They took mine and they took yours. I plan to take it back." He leaned back against the wall, grimacing in pain. Lyra tore a strip from her ruined gown and began to wrap his wounds. He watched her quietly. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "I am," she answered honestly. "But it feels different now." "When you stood against him?" "It felt like the air itself changed." Reed smiled faintly. "Fear's a good thing. It means we still have something to lose." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, alarms wailed in the distance. Maybe another fight, maybe just more cruelty. But inside the cell, something new had been born. Trust. Before falling asleep, Lyra whispered, "If there is a way out, I'll follow you." Reed opened one eye, smirking. "Then you better keep up." That night, as the fortress lights dimmed, the human stared at the metal cuffs binding his hands. He had already mapped every corner of their cell in his head. Every sound. Every weakness. When the final light went out, Reed began to move again, slow, careful, determined. Lyra watched in silence, her heart pounding as she realized he wasn't just brave. He was planning something impossible. The human's defiance wasn't just an act of pride. It was the beginning of a rebellion. The fortress never slept. Machines hummed, guards shouted, and the red glow of alien lights filled every corner. Yet deep underground, in a forgotten cell, something quiet but dangerous was unfolding. Reed sat beside the wall, his fingers working carefully at his chains. The small metal pin he had hidden in his sleeve scraped softly against the lock. Lyra watched him nervously, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light. You really think that tiny thing can break military locks? She whispered. Reed didn't look up. Locks are made by hands. That means they can be broken by them too. Lyra wanted to believe him, but fear tugged at her heart. The fortress was crawling with soldiers. Escape was impossible. Still, when she looked at him, she saw something she hadn't seen in any soldier before. Quiet faith. He stopped for a moment and turned toward her. How many guards patrol this floor? 3 at night, she answered softly. Sometimes 4 if the commander suspects anything. Good, he said. Then we'll move when they change shifts. She blinked. We? He smiled slightly. You didn't think I'd leave you behind, did you? Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. To the aliens, she was a symbol, a possession. But to this human, she was a person. Hours passed. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Lyra could hear the faint sound of the outer alarms, the guards switching duty. Reed pressed one final twist into the cuff lock. A soft click echoed. The chain fell. Lyra gasped. You did it. Keep your voice down, he whispered, standing to stretch his sore arms. He stepped closer to her, eyes sharp. Now your turn. He kneeled and started working on her cuffs. His hands moved fast but careful, his breath steady. Lyra couldn't stop staring at him, not at his face, but at his calmness. He wasn't afraid, not even here in the heart of the enemy's fortress. The final lock released with a faint hiss. Lyra's hands were free. She rubbed her wrists, the marks still glowing faintly blue. What now? She asked. Reed pointed to the corner wall. There's a vent shaft behind that panel. I saw them bring food through it. If it connects to the waste tunnels, we can reach the outer perimeter. Lyra frowned. You memorized all that? From one glance? He shrugged. Humans are good at paying attention when survival's involved. They moved quietly toward the wall. Reed pried open the panel with a piece of broken metal. The vent inside was narrow, coated with dust and cables. I'll go first, he said. If anyone spots us, I'll deal with them. No, she said firmly. We go together. For a moment, he looked at her, surprised. Then he nodded. Together, then. They crawled through the vent, every movement careful, every sound a risk. The metal was cold under their palms. Lyra's heart beat fast, echoing in her ears. Behind them, the muffled noise of the fortress faded slowly. After what felt like hours, they reached a grate. Through it, Lyra saw a dark hallway filled with shadows and flickering lights. 2 guards walked past, their voices sharp. Reed waited, counting their steps. Then he whispered, Now. He kicked the grate loose and slid out silently. Lyra followed. They moved fast, hugging the walls. Reed found a control panel and pressed a few buttons. A map flickered briefly on the holographic screen. There, he pointed. North exit, 2 kilometers through the lower tunnels. If we reach it, I can send a signal to my rescue ship. Lyra hesitated. Your ship is still out there? Reed nodded. Hiding beyond the moon. They're waiting for my call. For the first time since her capture, Lyra felt something real. Not just hope, but possibility. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from behind them. One of the guards had spotted the open vent. Run, Reed shouted. They sprinted through the corridor, alarms flashing red. The sound of boots thundered behind them. Reed fired the guard's own weapon, hitting the door controls. The heavy blast doors slid shut just as the soldiers reached them. Lyra leaned against the wall, gasping. You're insane, he grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Probably. But it's working. They pushed forward, deeper into the tunnels. The air was thick with heat and the smell of machinery. Reed guided her through narrow passages, jumping over broken cables and fallen pipes. When they finally reached a large chamber, he stopped. In the center of the room stood a massive gate, sealed, guarded by energy locks. Beyond it lay freedom, Lyra whispered. Can you open it? Reed studied the controls. I can try, but once I do, every soldier in this fortress will know exactly where we are. She stepped beside him, eyes steady. Then let them come. Reed looked at her, the same woman who had once sat bound and crying, now standing strong beside him. A slow, proud smile crossed his face. All right then, he said, cracking his knuckles. Let's make some noise. He slammed his hand down on the control panel. Sparks flew, lights blazed, and the massive gate began to rise with a deafening roar. Behind them, the sirens screamed again. The chase had truly begun. The heavy gate finally rose with a thunderous roar, releasing a wave of cold night air into the fortress tunnels. Reed grabbed Lyra's hand. "Now!" he shouted. They ran out into the darkness as sirens blared behind them. Red lights flashed along the walls. Alarms screamed across the fortress, alerting every guard in the area. Outside, the alien wasteland stretched endlessly, a wild landscape of black sand and glowing blue stones. Twin moons hung low in the sky, bathing the desert in pale light. The moment their feet hit the open ground, the chase began. Behind them, armored vehicles rolled out of the gates, their searchlights slicing through the dark. Drones whirred above, scanning the ground. Reed led the way through the rough terrain, his every step quick and sure. Lyra stumbled but kept running, clutching his hand tightly. "Where are we going?" she gasped. "Northridge," he shouted over the wind. "My signal beacon's hidden there. If we reach it, my crew can find us." The ground trembled as an explosion burst behind them. The warlord's troops had fired plasma bolts into the sand. The heat singed Lyra's hair. She screamed but kept running. Reed turned, firing a stolen blaster back at the pursuing drones. 2 of them exploded, but 3 more swooped lower. "Keep low," he ordered. They dove behind a pile of glowing rocks as another blast hit nearby. Sand flew everywhere, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. Lyra's heart pounded. "They'll catch us," she whispered, trembling. Reed looked at her, his face lit by the pale moonlight. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "We're not done yet." He helped her up again, and they moved through the shifting dunes. The landscape looked endless. No roads, no life, only wind and silence. But Reed's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Every few steps, he checked the small device in his hand, watching for a signal. As they climbed a rocky hill, Lyra stumbled and fell hard. Reed turned back instantly. She was bleeding from her knee. "Leave me," she said breathlessly. "I'm slowing you down." He knelt beside her, shaking his head. "Not happening." With surprising strength, he lifted her into his arms. She tried to protest, but his grip was steady. "Humans don't leave their own behind," he said softly. Lyra's eyes widened. "But I'm not one of you," Reed smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter." The simple words hit her harder than any weapon. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not even her own people. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder. Searchlights swept the hills. Reed ducked behind a boulder just as another plasma shot streaked past. It hit a nearby cliff, sending shards of rock flying. He glanced at his tracker again. "We're close. 1/2 kilometer more." Lyra, still in his arms, whispered, "Why do you care so much? You could have escaped alone." Reed's voice was calm, steady. "Because I saw what they did to you. No one deserves chains. Not human. Not alien. Not anyone." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're different, Reed." He looked ahead at the glowing ridge. "So are you." They reached the top of the hill just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Reed set her down gently and crouched beside a small pile of rocks. He brushed away the dust, revealing a small metal beacon hidden underneath. "This is it," he said. "Once I activate it, my team will come for us." Before he could press the switch, a loud crack echoed across the wasteland. A plasma bolt hit the beacon, destroying it instantly. Sparks flew and smoke rose into the air. Lyra gasped. "No," Reed turned sharply. Down below, a line of armored soldiers was climbing toward them. At the front was Warlord Korthar himself, his armor shining like fire under the rising sun. Reed cursed under his breath. "They're faster than I thought." Lyra looked at him, fear and desperation in her eyes. "What now?" Reed's jaw tightened. "Now, we make a stand." He picked up his blaster and moved to the edge of the ridge. Lyra followed, standing beside him even though her hands trembled. The wind whipped through her hair. The warlord's voice boomed across the desert. "Human, surrender. The bride belongs to me." Reed raised his weapon. "Not anymore." The warlord laughed, drawing his massive blade. The soldiers charged. Reed fired again and again, the blast lighting up the morning sky. Lyra grabbed a fallen weapon and fought beside him. Her fear replaced by fire. For a brief, blazing moment, 2 figures stood against an army, a human and an alien bride who refused to break. And in that light, even the endless desert seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was watching. The rising suns painted the alien sky in orange and blue as the last echo of gunfire faded. Smoke curled from the battlefield. Dozens of the warlord's soldiers lay scattered across the dunes, their weapons silent. Reed's blaster was nearly empty. his arms shaking with exhaustion. Lyra stood beside him, her dress torn, her hair tangled, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. For the first time, it seemed they had won. Reed scanned the horizon. We need cover. They'll send more soon. Lyra nodded weakly. There's an abandoned mining outpost east from here. My people used it long ago. Lead the way, Reed said. They moved through the cracked plains, their shadows long behind them. The desert wind howled like a living thing, carrying the smell of ash and metal. Every step hurt, but they kept walking, driven by a fragile thread of hope. By dusk, the mining outpost appeared, a cluster of broken towers half buried in sand. Rusted doors creaked in the wind. It was quiet, too quiet. Reed checked the perimeter. No guards, no tracks. Looks clear. They entered the main chamber. The air smelled of dust and old oil. Lyra found a control panel and managed to power up dim lights. Reed collapsed against a wall, breathing hard. Rest, Lyra said softly. You've done enough, he smiled faintly. You sound like a captain. She blushed slightly but turned away, hiding her face. For a while there was peace. Fragile, silent, but real. Reed cleaned his weapon and patched a wound on his shoulder. Lyra searched the storage crates, finding some dried rations. When she returned, she saw him staring at a small silver locket in his hand. Inside was a picture of Earth. Blue oceans, white clouds. You're home, she said quietly. Yeah, he replied. Haven't seen it in years, she smiled sadly. It looks beautiful. It is, he said. Maybe one day you'll see it too. Her heart tightened at the thought. But before she could answer, a noise echoed through the corridor. Faint footsteps. Reed's eyes narrowed. He raised his blaster. Stay behind me. A shadow appeared at the doorway. A tall alien male with pale skin and golden armor. Lyra gasped. Talon? Reed glanced at her. You know him? He was my guard before the war, she said. He served my family. Talon stepped closer, lowering his weapon. Princess Lyra, you're alive. The others thought you were lost. Lyra ran to him, relief flooding her face. We escaped. We need help. Korthar's men are hunting us. Talon looked at her, then at Reed. You escaped. With a human. Reed lowered his weapon slowly. We don't have time for old rivalries. We just need shelter. For a moment, Talon's expression softened. Of course, he said. You're safe now. He led them deeper into the outpost, showing them a hidden chamber filled with old supplies. Lyra smiled gratefully. Thank you, Talon, you've saved us. But Reed's instincts screamed. Something felt wrong. Talon's eyes were too calm, too cold. When Lyra left to find water, Reed grabbed Talon's arm. If you're planning something, don't, Talon smirked. You don't understand, human. She belongs to my people. You filled her head with foolish hope. Reed's grip tightened. She doesn't belong to anyone. Before Talon could reply, a sharp sound echoed through the air. A communicator activating. Talon pressed a button on his wristband. Reed lunged, but it was too late. A voice crackled through the device. Signal received. Target located. Move in. Lyra rushed back, eyes wide. Talon, what did you do? Talon didn't meet her gaze. I called Korthar. It's the only way to save our clan. He promised peace if I returned you. Her voice broke. You betrayed us? I did what I must, Talon said coldly. The human will die. You will live. That's the deal. Reed raised his blaster, but Talon fired first. The bolt hit Reed in the shoulder, sending him crashing against the wall. Lyra screamed, diving to his side. Talon's soldiers entered the outpost moments later, their armor gleaming in the red light. Reed groaned, clutching his wound. Lyra, run! No! She shouted, tears falling. I'm not leaving you again. Talon grabbed her by the arm, pulling her away. You don't understand, Lyra. Korthar spared your people once. He can do it again. Lyra's voice shook with fury. He destroyed everything, and now you're helping him finish it. She tore herself free and snatched Reed's blaster from the ground. For the first time, her hands didn't tremble. Talon, she said, her voice low and steady. I'm done being someone's prize. The next moment, the chamber flashed bright. One single shot. Talon fell, his eyes wide with disbelief. Lyra dropped the weapon, breathing hard. Reed, bleeding and weak, looked up at her. Remind me. Never to make you angry. She laughed through her tears and knelt beside him. You're not dying here, human. Not after everything. Outside, the fortress alarms grew louder again. The warlord's army was coming. But this time, Lyra wasn't running in fear. She was running with purpose. Smoke filled the old mining outpost as explosions thundered outside. The ground shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Lyra held Reed close, his blood staining her hands. He was pale, his breathing slow but steady. "They're coming," she whispered, hearing the sound of armored boots echoing through the tunnels. Reed forced a weak smile. "Then we'd better move fast. You're hurt," she said. "You can't even stand," he chuckled softly. "I've been worse." He reached for his weapon, but she stopped him, shaking her head. "No more fighting," Lyra said firmly. "We'll find another way." Reed looked into her eyes, calm even in the chaos. "Lyra, sometimes fighting is the only way." The sound of plasma rifles charging grew louder. Lyra clenched her fists, panic filling her chest. "They'll kill us both." "Not if I can help it." Reed struggled to his feet, leaning against the wall for balance. His uniform was torn, blood soaking the shoulder wound, yet his gaze was still sharp, alive with the same fire she'd seen on the first day. He moved to the control panel and started typing commands. Sparks flew as the old system flickered on. "This place still has power," he muttered. "If I overload the fusion core, it'll take half their army with it." Lyra froze. "You'll die if you do that." He gave her a faint smile. "Maybe, but you'll live." "No," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "You can't do this. There has to be another way." He looked at her gently. "Lyra, you told me once your people believed in destiny. Maybe this is mine." Tears filled her eyes. "I believed my destiny was to die in chains. You changed that. Don't take it away now." For a moment he didn't speak. The only sound was the distant thunder of approaching soldiers. Then he said quietly, "You gave me something too. You made me remember why humans fight. Not for glory, not for orders, but for someone worth saving." Her lips trembled. "Then save me by living." He brushed a hand against her cheek, his touch warm even through the cold dust. "I can't promise that, but I can promise you'll see the stars again." The doors burst open. Warlord Korthar himself stepped through, his armor glowing crimson, his massive blade dripping with energy. Behind him marched a dozen soldiers. "So," Korthar growled, "the human still breathes. How touching." Reed raised his blaster. "Still standing too." The warlord laughed, the sound shaking the walls. "You fought well, human, but this ends now." Reed took a step forward. "You're right. It ends today." He tapped a small device on his wrist, a remote detonator connected to the fusion core. Lights around the chamber began flashing red. Korthar's eyes widened. "What have you done?" "Set the countdown," Reed said calmly. 5 minutes till everything in this place turns to dust." The soldiers aimed their weapons, but Korthar lifted his hand. "Hold, you wouldn't sacrifice yourself for her." Reed's voice hardened. "Watch me." Lyra's tears blurred her vision. "Reed, please." He turned to her, smiling softly. "Get out. Follow the tunnels north. There's a maintenance hatch that leads outside. Go, now." She shook her head violently. "I won't leave you." He leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "You already saved me, Lyra. Now let me return the favor." Before she could argue, he pressed a small silver chip into her hand, the human insignia he always carried. "Keep this, so you'll never forget what you are now. Free." Then he pushed her toward the side tunnel just as Korthar roared and charged. Reed fired, the blast striking the warlord's armor. The two clashed violently, the sound of energy and metal filling the air. Sparks flew as Korthar swung his blade, cutting through walls. Reed dodged, his movement slower now, but every strike was fueled by determination. Lyra watched from the tunnel entrance, her heart breaking. "Reed!" she screamed. He looked back once, just once, and smiled. "Run!" She turned and fled as the fusion core reached critical levels. The sound of explosions followed her, heat searing her back as she stumbled through the collapsing tunnels. When she finally burst into the open desert, the outpost behind her erupted into a pillar of fire and light. The shockwave knocked her to the ground. She looked back, eyes wide with horror and grief. The sky burned red as the explosion faded into silence. "Reed," she whispered. Her voice cracked, her heart heavy with pain. The wind carried only dust and ashes. For a long time she knelt there, clutching the insignia in her hand. Her tears fell on the metal surface, shining in the twin moonlight. "He saved me," she said softly. "He saved us all." The warlord's army was gone, the fortress destroyed, but the cost was unbearable. Lyra rose slowly, her face streaked with tears but her eyes filled with fire. "I'll carry your story," she whispered to the stars. "Every world will know the name of the human who defied them all." She turned toward the horizon, the insignia glowing faintly in her hand, a small piece of humanity that would guide her forever. Days passed after the explosion. The desert was quiet now, the fortress in ruins. Only ash and broken metal remained where the warlord's power once stood. Lyra walked through the wasteland, her body weak, her heart hollow. The insignia Reed had given her hung around her neck, the small silver piece that once shone on his chest. She touched it often as if it carried his warmth still. Every night she looked at the twin moons and whispered his name. "Reed, if you can hear me, I kept my promise. I'm free, but it means nothing without you." She wasn't alone anymore. Survivors from her world had found her, soldiers, refugees, and even children. They called her the freed bride, the one who led them from the darkness. They followed her now, believing in her strength. But Lyra knew that strength had a source, a human who refused to bow, who taught her what courage meant. One evening, as she stood before the campfire, a young alien soldier approached. "Commander Lyra," he said softly. "Scouts found something near the ridge. You should see it." She nodded, hiding the pain that still lived in her eyes. The soldier led her across the sand to a narrow canyon lit by faint blue light. There, half buried in dust, stood a human escape pod, burnt, scarred, but intact. Her heart stopped. She rushed forward, brushing off the sand, her hands trembling. The hatch was open, and inside, a tattered uniform, human, Reed. She whispered, her voice broke as tears filled her eyes. For a moment she thought it was just a relic, another reminder of what she'd lost. But then she saw it. Faint footprints leading away from the pod, human footprints. Her breath caught. "He's alive," she whispered. Without hesitation, she followed the trail. It led through the canyons and across the dunes, faint but steady. Every step brought her closer to something her heart already knew. Finally, at the edge of an old ridge, she saw a figure standing against the light of dawn. Tall, weary, his clothes torn and burned, but unmistakably human. "Reed," she cried, her voice shaking. He turned slowly, and when she saw his face, bruised, scarred, but smiling, her knees nearly gave out. "Lyra," he said softly, his voice rough but alive. "You made it." She ran to him, tears falling freely, and threw her arms around him. He winced from the pain but laughed quietly. "Easy," he whispered. "Still a few cracked ribs." She pulled back, looking at him with disbelief. How did you survive?" Reed looked at the horizon, his eyes distant. "The blast threw me into the tunnels. My emergency beacon activated just before the core exploded. My team picked up the signal, pulled me out before the place collapsed." Lyra stared, speechless. "All this time, I thought you were gone." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You should know by now, humans are hard to kill." She laughed through her tears. "You shouldn't joke about that," he smiled. "It's how we stay sane." For a moment, silence hung between them, not empty but full of everything they'd endured. Around them, the wind whispered across the sand, carrying the smell of smoke and stars. Then Reed looked toward the camp in the distance. "You did it," he said softly. "You freed them." Lyra shook her head. "We did it." "You gave them hope?" Reed smiled faintly. "Hope's a funny thing. You pass it on and it grows." She took his hand, holding it tightly. "Then don't let go of it now." They stood together side by side as the first rays of sunlight touched the ruins. The twin moons faded into the sky, replaced by the promise of a new dawn. Behind them, their people gathered, seeing the human and the alien leader together, symbols of unity in a galaxy that once only knew war. Lyra looked up at the sky. "What now?" she asked. Reed smiled. "Now, we rebuild, together." She nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Together," she repeated, as the sun rose higher. Lyra pressed the insignia against her chest and whispered one last promise to the wind. He changed everything. And from that day forward, stories of the human who defied the warlord and freed the bride spread across the stars. A tale of courage, sacrifice, and love that even the universe would remember.